most people, geopolitics is an abstraction. For South Caucasus residents, including Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, this is a daily reality. The region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, Europe and Asia, is at the crossroads of old empires, Ottoman, Persian, and Russian, located next to the warring parties of the most dangerous wars of our time, Russia against Ukraine, and the Iran-Israel conflict. It illustrates, like few other regions, the rise of medium-sized powers and the retreat of large ones. These two wars are changing the face of the region more than anything else since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The first cracks were appearing here in the late 80s. Putin's war against Ukraine has inadvertently brought an end to the hitherto intractable conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is now trying to break free from Russian control and make peace with Turkey. Meanwhile, the conflict between Israel and Iran has elevated the status of oil-rich Azerbaijan, the largest and militarily strongest of the three countries, as rising regional powers capable of confronting their larger neighbors. With the support of Turkey and Israel, who see it as a strategic ally in their conflict with Iran, Azerbaijan is considering joining the Abrahamic Accords. Only Georgia, once a favorite of the West, is moving in the opposite direction, sliding toward an ugly anti-Western autocracy allied with Russia. We live in a windy place. Elchin Amirbayov, special representative of Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, says of the changes sweeping the region, looking out over the Caspian Sea from his posh office in the capital Baku. These changes are seen in intense high-level diplomatic talks. On July 10th, as The Economist was going to press, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, at war for more than 30 years, met for the first ever direct talks without mediators. This comes after Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's historic visit to Istanbul last month, where he was ceremoniously welcomed by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Among the influential guests who recently visited the South Caucasus were Steve Witkoff, special representative of Donald Trump, Masoud Pezeshkian, president of Iran, and Kaja Kallas, EU foreign policy chief. Further developments will be felt far beyond the region. Peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan will allow Armenia to enter the so-called middle corridor of trade and energy linking China and Central Asia with Europe, bypassing Russia. This is especially important for Europe's energy security, as Georgia is becoming a less and less reliable partner. Russia is trying to stop this by putting pressure on the South Caucasus trio, which it still considers its sphere of influence. However, the speed of Russia's loss of influence is striking, given the dominant position it achieved 5 years ago as a result of the 44-day war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh and the adjacent Azerbaijani territory occupied by Armenia since the early 1990s. The occupation of the enclave, like many other frozen conflicts in the former Soviet Union, was a key element of Russian influence. However, when Azerbaijan attacked it in 2020 to regain control, Russia refused to help defend Armenia, partly in retaliation for the popular uprising 2 years earlier that brought the Democrat Pashinyan to power, and partly as an opportunity to deploy Russian troops elsewhere in the region. Putin allowed Azerbaijan to occupy part of the territory around Nagorno-Karabakh before imposing a ceasefire that allowed Russia to introduce troops into Azerbaijan under the guise of peacekeepers, making Armenia more vulnerable and dependent on it. The ceasefire agreement was also aimed at restoring transportation links in the region by establishing a road and rail line that would cross Armenia's sovereign territory and connect the main part of Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan, an Azerbaijani enclave bordering Iran and Turkey. Most importantly, however, Mr. Putin has set conditions that the FSB, the Russian security service, will control this corridor. However, all these machinations collapsed after Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. In 2023, with Russia distracted by its own war, Azerbaijan recaptured all of Nagorno-Karabakh in less than 24 hours, while Russian peacekeepers stood by powerlessly. Without justification, Russia had to withdraw them. Inspired by its victory, Azerbaijan sought to engage with Moscow as an equal, rather than as a subordinate, thus challenging Russia's view of the South Caucasus as its own sphere, says Zaur Sheriev, a Baku-based expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Azerbaijan has recently been increasingly demonstrating its strength, making it clear that it does not want the FSB to control the corridor between the two parts of the country. Instead, he wants it to be run by a neutral international organization, possibly with U.S. involvement. Russia's declining influence in the region worries Putin, who has stepped up plans to build non-sanctioned transportation routes through it, such as a rail line to Iran, which is an important supplier of weapons for Russia to use in the war against Ukraine and in any potential conflict with the West. A new conflict soon erupted involving some 2 million Azerbaijani diaspora. Russian police have detained some 50 ethnic Azeris in the Urals, linking them to an unsolved case from 20 years ago. 2 Azerbaijanis were tortured and beaten to death during arrests. Friends, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new, but nevertheless, this is being written by The Economist for the English-speaking public, so it's important to understand what the English-speaking public might have, like what information they have in general. This one. Azerbaijan responded by storming the office of the Russian state propaganda agency Sputnik and detaining 2 employees whom it accused of being FSB agents. Russia denies this. The country's security forces also arrested and beat 8 Russians who moved to Baku after Russia invaded Ukraine. The leader in Baku cares as little about human rights as Putin does. This scandal ended the notion of Russian military presence in the Azerbaijan-Armenia corridor. The dispute between the two autocrats may subside, but the internal tensions between the rising regional power and the former imperial master will go nowhere. Azerbaijan, armed by both Turkey and Israel, is too strong for Russia to openly fight it. Putin's main hope for regaining influence may therefore lie in Armenia, which depends on Russian energy and food imports and where a Russian military base is still located. However, Russia lacks popular support in Armenia. After such a blatant betrayal, few Armenians see Putin as an ally. Ironically, however, the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh and the exodus of 100,000 ethnic Armenians from the disputed territory, however painful, also freed Armenia from a conflict that closed its border with Turkey, forced it to hand over security to Russia, and made its politics hostage to Nagorno-Karabakh clans closely tied to Moscow. Armenia was a de facto semi-colony of Moscow, which saw it as a valuable asset in its relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, says Mikhail Zolyan, a historian and analyst from Yerevan, the Armenian capital. After its defeat by Azerbaijan, Armenia seeks to break free from Russian influence and align with the EU. More importantly, it intensified attempts to normalize relations with Turkey, poisoned by memories of the Armenian genocide committed by the Ottoman Empire in 1915 to 1916. Mr. Pashinyan was trying to help Armenia overcome the trauma and bitterness of losing its historical homeland, symbolized by Mount Ararat, now in Turkey. He emphasized the importance of reconciliation instead of resentment. Arek Kochanyan, head of the Yerevan-based security think tank, argues that Armenia has long viewed Russia as its only defense against Turkey. Now it is Russia that is seen as the threat. According to Mr. Kochanyan, the opening of the border between Turkey and Armenia, closed since 1993, will strengthen Turkey's role as a rising star in the South Caucasus and a guarantor of the region's security. However, Turkey seems unwilling to open the border without the consent of Azerbaijan, which has also invested heavily in Turkey. Azerbaijan is stalling for time and making new demands. He demands that Armenia hold a referendum to remove residual claims to Nagorno-Karabakh from its constitution. And he wants unfettered access through southern Armenia to Nakhichevan. These demands testify not only to Azerbaijan's deep-rooted distrust of its former enemy, but also to its economic insecurity.
но и о его экономической незащищенности.
Despite all the oil wealth, GDP per capita in Azerbaijan is lower than in Armenia, which has no natural resources. However, these demands risk derailing the deal. Armenians are more likely to agree to constitutional change after seeing the benefits of trade and open borders than before. Armenia wants to synchronize the opening of the Armenian-Turkish border with an agreement to create a corridor through its territory, even if this happens before a formal peace agreement with Azerbaijan. Ilham Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan since 2003, privately knows that Pashinyan is the best Armenian partner he could have in trying to broker a peace deal. However, he did not publicly show any support for him. Azerbaijan risks destabilizing Armenia, a country 3 times its size, by putting unnecessary pressure on it, despite threats from Russia. Putin's government is sparing no effort to get rid of Pashinyan, who faces elections next year one way or another. It hopes for a repeat of the Georgian scenario, in which Moscow-backed oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili and the church stopped the country's westward movement and steered it into the Russian orbit. Pashinyan said in June that his government had thwarted a coup attempt planned for September. It arrested Samvel Karapetyan, a Russian-Armenian billionaire, on charges of publicly calling for an illegal seizure of power in the country, which he denies. Margarita Simonian, head of RT, another Russian propaganda channel, called Pashinyan an antichrist and a traitor to ethnic Armenians like herself. Russia's malicious actions, both in Azerbaijan and Armenia, make the peace process particularly urgent, Mr. Shiriev believes. The window of opportunity is limited. Its omission could plunge the region back into dangerous geopolitical uncertainty.